With Eric Helms of 3D Muscle Journey. Hello, Eric. Look at that.
Hello.
There's the awesome hat. And this is just going to be a little bit of a Q&A that we've put together for Eat, Train, Progress. And just briefly, I have been fortunate enough to learn quite a bit from Eric Helms. Doing some consulting work, I've hired him to just basically coach me both for this upcoming powerlifting meet, but then also just so I can kind of get my nerd on, as we call it, Eric, where I just basically grill you with questions to strengthen my knowledge and also hopefully make me become a better coach, because I'm also doing that for general population. And it's been a pleasure. So thank you, Eric, for being willing to donate your time for the betterment of us and the group that we run. We've got some interesting questions for you. And Sarah, you also have some experience with Team 3DMJ. You want to talk about that briefly?
Yeah, so my coach is Alberto Nunez, who is also with 3DMJ, one of the coaches. I've been working with him for about 18 months now, mainly for powerlifting purposes, but he also obviously works on my nutrition as well. But he's actually programming for my powerlifting with a goal to nationals in October. So timely as well, because we've got the meet coming up tomorrow.
Tomorrow,
yeah.
And I also just want to briefly add, for anyone watching this from the Eat, Train, Progress group, if you're looking at coaching, I don't know what you guys have for availability, but I'm just going to mention that Team 3DMJ, in my opinion, they're just excellent coaches, and it's just been fun to, even though I'm not a full-time like 3DMJ athlete, just getting to do the consulting with you and seeing how you treat people and what your philosophy is. I think it's an awesome thing. So anyone watching this that's looking at seriously powerlifting or bodybuilding, I'm just going to throw a recommendation out there that you guys are awesome.
And one of the things that I would add is, and this is one thing I really appreciate with you guys, is the balance of, it's not only about bodybuilding, it's life. You need to live your life as well, and so there's a very good, from my perspective, balance of making sure you don't go completely focused in one way. It's like, life happens and you want to live your life, and there's a mental aspect to it. And that's one thing I find really good about you guys is the balance. It's not like the whole sort of blood, guts, and glory sort of thing at with the exclusion of everything else. So I just find it very, very balanced, which is good.
That's awesome. I really appreciate the feedback and the plugs, guys. And I'm honored to hear all the positivity. So yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. I'd go into it more, but I think you guys covered it really well. But yeah, we believe in sustainability, and that means acknowledging that you're a human.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's been an honor working with you, Patrick, and Sarah. I'm glad to be part of the team. So very cool.
Thank you very much. So first question, training during injuries. And when this question came up in the thread, I laughed really hard because, as you know, I've had a streak of injuries, and it's
training as Patrick.
Yeah, right, exactly. So do you have any general philosophies or comments regarding training during an injury? And then additionally, is there any standard rule that you would have for adjusting calorie intake when you have an athlete that's injured and the injury prevents them from training a significant portion of their body?
Or even maybe macronutrient as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so yeah, the big one I think is more philosophical. It's when you're injured, it's very easy to get depressed and have that kind of consume everything, really. And I always try to encourage my athletes to focus on what they can do rather than what they can't, and try to keep a positive mindset. So, if you just had a lower back injury, let's go on a bench specialization program, assuming you can arch your back and all that stuff. This is also coming from a powerlifting perspective. But just as an example, it's very easy to get sucked into the woe is me kind of, here's what I can't do, what is this going to mean, and asking questions like, how is this going to affect my blank, and it's going to affect your whatever the way it does, and that's not something you can really change outside of doing what you can. So it's more important to focus on what is the actual, where do I have agency, and then following that. So that's the big philosophical one. The second one, of course, is I'm not a physiotherapist or a PT or an orthopedic or anything like that. So I always, as soon as I've got someone who has, and this is a good advice to any trainer of any type, unless you also happen to be an injury specialist, get someone who you can refer out to, or help the person find someone locally. Typically that means someone who works with resistance trained athletes and injuries. So if you can find someone who works with team sport athletes who lift a lot of weights, like American football players, if you can find someone who works, for everyone who's not in the States, if you can find someone who works with rugby, if you can find ideally an Olympic weightlifting guy, or even someone who works with this casual gym goers who lift weights, that's always nice. They are hard to find. They're kind of few and far between. And your average injury specialist is going to be more used to working with, like, car accidents and older people. But have a good person to refer to. Focus on what you can do. Once you get clear and figure out what you can and can't do, then it's a matter of being smart about it. So you can definitely train around injury. Some of the kind of my easy go-tos are when I have someone with a lower back injury, I ask them, can you do a hip thrust? Or, hey, if we move that squat bar, can we still get to depth and squat without injuring your lower back? Because a lot of the times, the more upright you stay, the less torque on the lower back. And I've had guys who've been doing barbell hip thrusts and front squats as kind of their main movements for a while. And then the transition coming back to deadlifts and squats is much easier, because they may have lost the movement pattern, but they haven't atrophied.
Okay.
So that's really useful. Other things, if you're not aware of or familiar with blood flow restriction training / occlusion training.
We have a question coming up on that.
Anytime you have a joint injury, and it's a limb joint, obviously it's a little difficult when it's like your SI joint or something like that. So knee or elbow injury, it's a great thing to use, because you can reduce the load 20-30% of your 1RM and still get an effective stimulus. And that's, you can stimulate the muscle without overstimulating the joint, I suppose is a good way to put it. And yeah, so it's a little other things like that, like neutral grip movements when you've got elbow issues, neutral grip pressing when you've got shoulder issues. So figuring out what you can do, what you can't, getting creative, and seeing a specialist, and then having the right mindset. As far as your specific question on reducing calories, yeah, if your injury changes your activity, you will probably need to adjust your nutrition.
So
there's a couple ways. Go ahead.
What goes with that? Is there a reason, or is it a valid thought to avoid being in an energy deficit if you can't train a significant portion of your body, because you don't want to risk additional muscle loss by being in a deficit during that period? Or is that all relative?
Yeah, I would think that where a deficit would change, if your activity level changes. So
definitely.
So you almost just kind of have to play it by ear. I wouldn't be too worried about the muscle loss side of it. I'd be more concerned about, hey, if I have a very high energy expenditure normally, and all of a sudden I'm in bed rest, if I stay on 4,000 calories and all of a sudden I only need 3,000 calories, that can result in some accumulated fat mass, which is kind of just adding insult to injury.
Yes.
Figuratively and literally, So it would be more an instance of let's see how your weight changes. And sometimes this is difficult to do because you might be on antibiotics or anti-inflammatories or just totally different. There's going to be a lot of inflammation regardless. So your weight will do some wacky stuff if you have a significant injury. It'll jump around. But it's not a bad idea to perhaps adjust your nutrition a little bit if it's something that's really actually keeping you, on bed rest or something like that. If it's, you hurt your shoulder and you can't press and you've been doing lighter weights, no.
What if it's,
you're on crutches?
What if it's you're recovering from surgery, so you can only train your lower half, so literally your upper body is completely out of commission, no training at all? Would that be justification for staying at maintenance for an athlete in that position?
If they're replacing their upper body volume with additional leg work, probably not. Okay. If they are actually doing like let's say they're on an upper lower split, let's just throw that out there. They go from training 4 times a week to training twice a week. Maybe you drop your calories by 100 or 2. But weight training doesn't burn as much as we think, and unless you're also prevented from doing things like I can't go grocery shopping, or I can't even lift my arms over my head. I think it's very case by case. There is definitely an argument sometimes. Other times, it's probably just overly, kind of nitpicky.
Okay.
At what point would you be concerned for somebody that, because obviously there's my understanding is there's a greater risk of muscle loss on a deficit, obviously than maintenance or a surplus, and obviously if you can't train, that increases that risk. Obviously, at what point would you suggest somebody just going on maintenance to mitigate any LBM loss, or is it like one of these variable, play it by ear, how long has it been sort of thing?
It's probably the latter, but you know, it's almost kind of the same thing where I have guys who freak out on the idea of doing a deload during a diet.
I've
It's
been
like,
there.
well, no, I'm already dieting, but
Yeah.
if I don't do a heavy training week, then I'm just going to lose muscle.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's kind of just forgetting priorities. It's like, okay, hold on, we're on a diet, so your recovery is compromised. So we're trying to get an adequate training stimulus, and you're telling me you don't want to follow periodization. That's basically what periodization is.
Yeah.
It's having
Yes.
planned light weeks so you can have a heavier week. So I look at it like that. You're going to need to adjust some things so you can recover and adapt to your injury. And what's the big picture? Like if we eat a bunch of food to try to make sure that you don't, lose as much muscle mass because you can't train, and then you just kind of get fat and lose muscle anyway because there's no stimulus on your muscles, how are you going to feel about it? So, I mean, you can put an astronaut in space and you can feed him protein shakes every day. He's still going to lose a lot of muscle mass. So,
good point.
Now obviously that's a big slippery slope to make a point.
Right.
But I would think that obviously not eating does exacerbate muscle loss, but the root core of creating, muscle growth is putting
Training.
resistance against it. So that's going to
Yeah, makes sense. General thoughts on occlusion training and how you might incorporate that into a program. How or when you might use that.
Yeah, I almost exclusively use occlusion training when I'm dealing with joint injuries personally. It can be fun, it can be interesting. I actually did it for an entire year straight for all of my arm and leg isolation work just to kind of see, like, is it magic? But much like the research shows, it has about the same stimulus as regular training, so it didn't do a whole lot else for me. It's good for your inner masochist because it does hurt, it's easily practically applicable. There's a really good article by I think Jeremy Lowenecki. I just normally, if someone wants to ask me about it, I Google some interview that Jeremy did. I can't remember the exact website off the top of my head, but anyway. He's one of the key researchers in the States who looks at that. So I would definitely recommend checking out his stuff if you're interested in that. But yeah, do you want me to go into why it works or just kind of how I use it?
How would you implement it if someone were looking at actually getting the proper equipment to do it and going into the gym and doing it? How would you go about implementing that? Or should I just link Jeremy's article? Like, is there an article that covers that?
There is, but I'll go into it briefly. So it's pretty straightforward. Basically, you use a load anywhere from, say, 20 to maybe at most 40% of your 1 rep max, typically on an isolation movement. You can do compounds. I find that knee wraps work great, and you're doing it at the top of the hip for legs. So you wrap the knee wrap to about a 6 or 7 out of 10 tightness. And then you go to town. Basically, you're doing say 3 or 4 high rep sets. The first one you probably want to take pretty close to failure, but not all the way there. That's kind of your primer set, so that now there's a lot of metabolites and a little bit of fatigue in the muscle, so that you're getting higher activation from set go. Wait about 30 seconds to a minute maybe at most, and then knock out sets of 10 to 20, nearly to failure, 3 sets. And you're just accumulating a whole lot of volume from doing that. And it's much more effective than it would have been if it were not included at, say, 20% or 30% of 1 RM. For the arms, typically, unless you just have really big arms, knee wraps are a little unwieldy. I've actually been able to use the extra long wrist wraps. So like the ones that are like just at the limit of, I think, what IPF specs allow. Is IPF limited? Anyway, longer wrist wraps. I can't remember the different federation specs, but I've been able to use those pretty effectively for wrapping my arms, and it's the same thing.
Okay. And are we losing him, or are we still here?
We're still.
Nope, we're still here.
It's just delayed.
We had a
Should I keep talking? Or should I wait?
No, you're fine. You're
No,
fine.
it's actually back to normal now.
It was funny. It went really slow, and then it caught up really fast, and then
We'll cut that bit out, don't worry.
that's all right. We might leave that in for
I should
context.
probably turn off my time machine. I don't know.
The one that you built.
Well, yeah, anytime I make a mistake in an interview, I go back in time to redo it. So.
Good idea.
But so they won't even see that. It'll be a paradox. Anyway, so yeah, wrist wraps, long wrist wraps for the upper body, unless you've got massive arms, and you can use like knee sleeves, knee wraps for the lower body, and then you will probably want to do like tricep extension curl, leg extension, leg curl, but you can do like leg press or other things if you specifically have issues with any of those movements.
I would assume, just based on the nature of the training, these are probably things you would tend to incorporate at the end of a workout. If you're also doing compound movements, logically you'd be sticking the stuff at the end pretty much.
Yeah. Basic programming still applies. You wouldn't want to fatigue out your isolation movements before moving into your compounds. Sorry, Dorian.
basically, it's what in situations where you want to save stress on the joints is really the time to use it. Whether it be because you're old like me, or whether it be because you've got injuries or something like that, it's just
like
something
me.
like him.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, those are both solid rationale. I've also heard the argument that you can get more volume in a shorter time period, it's more time efficient using occlusion. And I suppose, if you don't mind going through the process of doing the occlusion-based training, But yeah, I read it. I was like, I guess that makes sense. But I find it's also difficult to quantify the volume and quantify progression, because it's just kind of like you don't really run progression schemes on this type of thing. It's just kind of about it's so fatigue oriented. So I have a tough time programming for it. It doesn't make sense for me as a coach. Like, well, so do we do 25 reps next time? Or do we do 30% instead of 20%? Like. At a certain point, you're going to be pushing outside of the realm of what should be occlusion training for load and rep range. So for me, I like to use it more of an adjunct when there is an issue like you guys are talking about.
Okay, cool. Are there any indicators you might get from a client to tell that they could be having issues with either dedication or motivation or interest as it pertains to training?
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you guys probably both know, our big emphasis is open and honest communication with our clients, and we're very much not authoritarian coaches. We don't say, here's your program, just do it. I don't want to hear anything else in your report except for, animal pack quotes or something like that. We enjoy like all of the things. Like, so I try to create a coaching relationship in an environment where it's okay to say, Eric, I don't know what it is, but I'm dreading going to the gym right now. I don't want to go there. So sometimes they're just getting stale in a program. Sometimes it's actual overreaching, because I think probably one of the most early signs of overreaching or overtraining, or whatever you want to call it, is psychological stress and burnout. So the experience of quote-unquote burnout and also performance either flatlining or going down are typically things to look out for when you're probably pushing the person a little too hard. But yeah, I think from the word go, there should be a coach-client relationship where it's okay to say, I'm just not feeling it, And as much as even bodybuilders and powerlifters probably don't want to admit it, that does happen, And I like to, when I talk to my athletes about this, I reference relationships. And this is probably something you guys who are old enough will get. Like, marriage or any long-term relationship with anybody, marriage is a good one. When you love the person, there's a commitment to the relationship as well. It's not just like kind of a fairy tale, like, I'm going to be in love with you 24 hours, 60 minutes every hour. It's going to be, we're going to fight, we're going to have time periods where we're in conflict, we're going to resolve that, but both of us have made a commitment to do what's necessary to keep this relationship on its feet. And it's kind of like the difference between commitment and motivation. Like, I go through periods in my training all the time where I'm not necessarily that motivated, but because I'm committed to my goals, I still go to the gym and get it done. And that carries me through. Versus the people who haven't yet committed. They'll be there, after their New Year's resolution, or when a wedding comes up, or after they've actually really felt like, I'm just a slob and I hate it. And so they need something that pushes them back, and then they fall off.
Yeah.
So most athletes have made that commitment, and maybe they love the sport so much they had a much longer honeymoon period than most, and now they're surprised. It's 3 years in, and it just doesn't have the same spark that it does. And I normally tell them, look, that's going to happen, but it will come back. Like, I have phases in my training, just like I have phases in my marriage where it is just like the first day, you know, and that takes, you know, work on the part of the athlete to make their relationship with training fresh, new, healthy, and do the internal dialogue to make sure that they still have the same kind of motivation. They know why they're doing it. Just like in a relationship, you would have the between-person dialogue of going, hey, are we still in this? Are we still a committed partnership? You know, how are you feeling? What are your needs? Here are my needs. How can I help you? And you know, just like that's the way you see those couples that are walking around in their, you know, in their walkers who are still kissing and happy. It's because they have maintained that. And I think that's the same kind of thing you have to do with your training. You want to be that happy old couple in your walker with your squats, you know.
Well, not in a walker, hopefully.
You're happy and old.
Well,
Had to throw a dig in.
leave the walker against the squat rack.
We are not editing that out.
Yeah, wait till we start talking about injuries.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might be ill, but I'm not injured all the time.
So this is kind of a one of those generalized, kind of vacuous questions, but assuming we refer to squat, bench, and deadlift as the big three, what would you say are the next big three after those? And I know that that's a context void.
No, it's good.
Question.
I love questions like this because I get to turn them on their ear. So the only reason the big three is the big three is because they're the powerlifting movements. You know, in 1960, the big three, if you were talking to an Olympic lifter, would have been snatch, clean, and jerk, and strict overhead press. And you could have the same argument for, no, you get everything you need out of these, you know. And you know, there's a squat included in both the clean and the snatch, and you get all the pressing musculature in the press, you know, like. And then someone would be like, yeah, but you don't get chest, you know. And so, and you could say the same thing about the big three, like you don't get scapular retraction or you know, full shoulder extension, so you need to do rowing. So the big three are the big three because they're for powerlifting. And if you're a powerlifter, they're the big three. If you are not a powerlifter, there are three compound movements that may be useful for your goals. They are good and great powerlifting, great movements, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't argue that front squat, overhead press, and barbell hip thrust weren't your big three or something like that, you know. But yeah, the combination of those three movements does tend to hit most of the body. But if I've got a bodybuilder, I don't necessarily think that any of those movements are more important than, say, a strict row or a pull-up or an overhead press, you know, or even a calf raise for that matter, you know. Like if you're a bodybuilder and your goal is maximal proportionate development, or should the calves not be seen as important as the quads, you know? Wouldn't a bicep curl be just as important? I mean, so it's all you know, it's horses for courses. It's specific to the person's need. And if your goal is just kind of overall strength and development in a time efficient manner, yeah, I'd probably say something like you know, overhead press, weighted vertical row, and maybe some kind of horizontal row. Probably what I would say. If you gave me those asinine questions, if you could only do 6 lifts, those would be the 3 plus those. Probably.
Okay. Very good.
Because one thing we find in the forums on MFP is very much like you have to squat, you have to back squat, and it's like no, you don't, because you said you can do other things depending on your goal. There's other ways to achieve. Obviously, if you want to be a powerlifter and compete, you have to squat, but you don't need to do a back squat to achieve other goals at all. And I think people are very, I mean, this is ironic coming from me because I do powerlift, but people are very focused on the 3 lifts and forget the context of why someone's doing that or why someone's, what their goals are.
It's almost like people feel like they're a traitor to their roots if they don't take kind of an absolutist stance with the big three.
Yeah.
Like I will readily say they're probably 3 of the most effective compound barbell movements. They're great. When used effectively, they're fantastic. And I've been a competitive powerlifter for 10 years and I love them. However, if you can't do the movements effectively or without pain, or you don't enjoy them, or you don't need to do them because you're not a powerlifter, then they are just exercises.
And I'm very glad that you said if you don't enjoy them. I'm very glad you brought up that point, because I think that often gets overlooked in discussions about It might be a discussion about how to optimize someone's training program, but they fail to consider personal preference and the fact that if you give someone squats and they hate squats, that's really not a good recipe, especially for non-competitive athletes, because maybe you could make an argument that you could stick a hardcore bodybuilder on something like that and they're going to do it anyway, but especially for general population, I mean, that's just a big recipe for failure, I think, when you don't consider, are they going to enjoy this and are they going to actually go do it and love it? So.
Yeah.
100%. I would say the majority of the misunderstandings around this type of thing come from not getting that what works, what's optimal, and what's sustainable are three very different things.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
You can do almost anything and it'll work for a beginner general pop. You can also write down what's optimal, and they may not be doing it 3 months from now, but then it's not optimal because nothing's happening.
Yeah.
Right? So as a coach, you have to find a nice blend between the three. Like, it's what's the most optimal thing that's sustainable is kind of the response. It's never purely what's optimal because you're working with a human.
Yep. Next question. Have you ever seen circumstances where increasing someone's carbohydrate intake causes more rapid fat loss? Not necessarily just drops in water weight, but do you think there are cases of that exist where people can lose fat better on higher carb, higher calorie intakes?
Yes, is the short answer. So now, why is the intriguing question, though. So this is the kind of thing that's highly counterintuitive. We think calories in, calories out. How could you add food and then have faster weight loss? But it is not necessarily completely counterintuitive when you acknowledge that calories in, calories out is not a one side, but rather they directly influence one another. So great study that Garth did in 2011, where they had 2 different rates of weight loss in the same population. They took 2 different groups, a bunch of elite athletes, and they put one on a deficit that should get them 0.7% of their body weight loss per week. The other group, 1.4% loss of their body weight per week. And guess who lost more fat? The slower weight loss group. And it wasn't like there was excessive muscle loss in the other group. There was some, but the consistency of the fat loss was much better here. So I mean that's not exactly the same as saying, hey, we've hit a wall, let's add food in. But it does go to show you that based on how much you eat, that does change the other side of the equation, because what other rationale would be there, right? Sometimes trying to just push the issue too hard, too fast can cause problems. And this is population specific. Obviously, if you take someone who's very, very high in body fat, put them on a low calorie diet, they're going to be more resilient to that deficit than someone who's a little athlete who's lean, like I was just talking about. Because they have more excess calories with them on them. So it is person specific. So there's a little bit of a rationale, just so that we know what you take in changes what you can expend, or changes what you expend, right? That's the whole metabolic adaptation thing. And it does go both ways. It's well documented. And in the people who experience it, we're talking anywhere from a 10 to 20% increase or decrease beyond what would be predicted by their body weight as far as caloric expenditure, right? All right. So we know that there is a function in the body where the body does, modulate its expenditure, and 10 to 20% can be a significant amount if we're talking about a normal-sized person. Maybe they're dieting on 2,500 calories. That might be, hey, they could have been dieting on 3,000 or something like that. If that's 20% higher, right? Okay. So there is a physiological basis for how this could happen. Also, as those who've read the AARR. Lyle McDonald brought up a great point of saying, hey, how do you guys know that this water weight changes? And with high levels of stress, especially in the female body, that could be lingering, in combination with the menstrual cycle for I think he said 6 weeks or something like that.
And just to be clear, this was Lyle's piece on addressing Lane's metabolic damage concept, correct? Where Lyle did his right. Okay. And did Alan make that public? Yeah. I thought he did.
I don't know if he did.
Okay, I'll check on that. If he did make it public, I'll link it in the description box when I post the video. So.
Yeah, but for all the cheapskates out there, it's literally $10 a month, and you get access to stuff all the way back to 2008.
And let me just add,
research review.
Definitely. Yeah, I've been part of that for several years, and it's just an insanely great product. So, right with you there.
Yeah, I read it for maybe 5, 6, 7 episodes. So it's not just him either. You get a lot of good writers who he's connected with. So okay, done plugging. But yeah, so yeah, and then if you also have read Lyle's free article that he wrote a long time ago called Of Whooshes and Squishy Fat,
Yeah.
Yep.
he talks about that fat cells may actually refill themselves with water as fat is lost to make it so they can have that rebound. So this is possibly some adaptive thing in humans to where we can put fat back on for survival mechanisms. Exactly opposite what we want in physique land, but the possible reality of humans. So that means that if it is water retention, can you even necessarily distinguish it from body fat?
Right.
And I actually think that is harder to do than people say it is, because how often do you listen to top-level bodybuilders talking about they need to dry out or lose water, and you're looking at it and going, it looks like you just need to lose more body fat. And I don't think it's all self-deception. I think a lot of times there is some legitimate confusion as to what is water retention and what is body fat in people.
Okay.
So first off, water retention can happen, is a real thing, and carbs, sodium, and stress all can affect those things, right?
Yep.
All right. Secondly, there is the physiological basis for being able to ramp up calorie expenditure up or down to a point beyond what's expected that can surprise you as a coach or as a dieter. And then finally, one thing we have to realize as coaches is that we're always depending on self-reported intake to you.
Yes.
Right? Now, that said, as a coach, once you establish that relationship I was talking about before of trust and open and honesty and giving them a place to be able to say to you, hey, I'm not on my diet, I binged, et cetera, without being, recriminating, because it's so important to give them the environment to be able to be honest about their diet, or you're shooting in the dark. Or worse, making adjustments when you think something's happening that's actually not happening, because then you can actually push them in the wrong direction. So you are assuming that what they're tracking is what they are telling you. And also, secondly, you're actually assuming that what they're tracking is what they're tracking. Even if they are telling you the truth as they know it, they may be making errors.
Absolutely.
And people do weird stuff the more they get dieted. So, for example, I remember in my first contest prep, you guys are familiar with Walden Farms?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I had the Walden Farms chocolate sauce I had in my fridge. Literally every time I would walk by my fridge, I'd throw back a swig, because it's calorie free.
Yeah.
And I'm starving and crazy.
Yeah.
Okay, calorie free, right? So it does have some trace calorie. It's more importantly, it's got sodium in it. So during this period, my sodium spikes probably a gram a day, and all of a sudden I start gaining weight, right? So my weight bumps up, so I drop calories, so I get further freaked out, I have further cravings, and this snowball can kind of happen.
Yeah.
So you can see some really funky stuff happening with competitors. I've seen competitors whose diet gets largely supplanted by shirataki noodles, which are these basically noodles that are made just from fiber, right? And they're
Stinky.
higher liquid intake becomes diet soda, and they forget that, yeah, those 30 milligrams of caffeine in a Diet Coke, when you have 15 of them a day, actually add up to a lot of caffeine. So now they're drinking crap tons of caffeine. They've got fiber is pretty much their entire carb source, and their sodium through the roof because they're drinking Walden Farms like it's a bucket. And now they don't understand why they're ridiculous. They can't sleep because they're on massive amounts of caffeine. They're bloated because they've got like all this insoluble fiber in their body, and they are increasing their sodium intake by 2 grams. So those things can really throw a wrench into the equation. So sometimes it really pays to just kind of look at food sources. Like, give me a menu. That's what I'll ask my athletes sometimes. Like, when some weird stuff is going on, I think they should be losing, but they're not. Before I start making adjustments, I go, like, let me see a menu. So now, how does that tie into adding food? Well, when someone is really restricted, adding food does 2 things. Yes, it may create some kind of super compensation as far as expenditure and keep them in a deficit to make it more effective. That is very possible. Yes, secondly, it could prompt a whoosh where they start losing water weight. And that might be temporary. It might last up to 6 weeks, like we were saying. It may be that there was losses going on, and now we're just seeing the water start to tick down. And now we see kind of the losses that were actually already happening. Thirdly, it may be that all those weird behaviors that I was talking about get diminished now that they're not as on a very restricted diet. So their stress levels get lower. They don't feel the need to eat all that weird stuff. They don't take little extra bites. They don't cheat themselves. So it can be a lot of things going on. I would completely not discount the possibility that there is actually a increase in fat metabolism going on, an increase in calorie expenditure from adding more food, because it happens too consistently and I've seen it too frequently, and it is actually a strategy I use. When I've got enough time with someone and we've been dieting for a while, I add food. Now, most of the time, the on-paper rationale is, hey, we've hit a stall, let's take a diet break. But what often happens when I do a diet break is they start losing.
Okay. Can I interject with two things to kind of tag on to the end of this? First of all, you made a differentiation between someone being less than honest about reporting their intake and then someone just making mistakes or having nibbles. And I'm glad that you said that, because it is just a little personal pet peeve of mine when people associate tracking inaccuracies with integrity, because I think that there are plenty of cases where it is absolutely nothing to do with honesty, nothing to do with integrity, but those inaccuracies still exist, and especially for general population. Don't know how applicable it is to bodybuilders, maybe it still is, but for general population, I think that's a gigantic thing, because there are a whole host of scenarios where inaccuracies can pop up that have nothing to do with how honest someone is or how diligent they are with their tracking. It's just the nature of it just being difficult. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, and I just wanted to kind of throw that in there, because it gets challenging for me if I have to talk about tracking accuracy with a client, because it needs to be positioned in such a way that they know I'm not attacking your integrity, I'm not saying you're dishonest, I'm just talking about the fact that these inaccuracies exist and how do you address those.
I normally ask the client to do
Hi, Cat.
an honesty check. So typically that means, hey, give me a menu, and then we'll go from there.
That's awesome.
Look at that fluffy butt.
You know, you're not supposed to be on the counter.
Fluffy butt.
So anyway, fluffy butt. So yeah, I'll ask them to do an honesty check. So I'll have them give me a menu for a while, show me what they're eating, and then say, you know, how many meals out are you eating right now? Is that happening? So I'll typically ask questions, because a lot of the times, yeah, if the food is not in your control, you'd be surprised how off it can be, whether it's a restaurant or significant other cooking it. If it's not going on the scale, you know, you kind of have to question it. But yeah, you're 100% right, Patrick. It's more often than not, I'd say it's not an honesty thing if you've done your job as a coach and you've set up the right relationship. And it's very easy for all those little things to accumulate. And it's one of the downsides, the few downsides of taking a more flexible approach to dieting. Like if you have a menu that says eat an apple at 3 p.m., that's pretty clear cut, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are someone who is starving and trying to see what you can fit into your macros, all of a sudden you start doing a whole lot more things, like the amount of spices you use or ingredients in a cooking concoction, you know, increases in triplicate, and those little tiny things can add up. So yeah, all those non-sweetener or non-calorie sweeteners and items and things like, you know, fat-free Pringles and all the dieting foods that are out there, they all have little tiny errors as far
And
as,
coffee
you know,
has calories.
5 calories. Yeah, like all the little stuff that you think is negligible, when you have that all day, that can actually attribute to something.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of giving the person a menu for a while and seeing if it changes things. It's not saying, hey, we're going to go on eat clean from here on out.
Right.
Let's try to follow a relatively basic single food item menu for a week and see if all of a sudden you start losing. If it is, then we know that our accuracy was a little bit off.
Yeah.
So let's look to alleviate.
That's a good idea.
The coaching point.
I like it. The other point I wanted to make that you kind of alluded to, but I wanted to just make sure I understand it and see if this is your kind of position on it. With regards to the whole concept of eating more to lose more, would you say that as a generalization, it's probably going to be more applicable to these lean athletes and much less applicable to an obese person, just based on adaptations and things like that?
Based on physiological adaptations, yes. However, based on pragmatics, no.
Okay.
Because if someone stalls, it's going to happen for either psychological or physiological reasons, and if it's physiological, that's typically going to come with psychological stress as well.
Okay.
So oftentimes, when someone hits a big stall that lasts 3-4 weeks, you know, and you've like waited it out, you tried a few different things, and it's still stalled out, it's time for a diet break anyway if the person's open to it. You know, so taking kind of that zigzag approach to dieting, every time we get stuck, we eat more. It's counterintuitive, but I think it's often the solution. I work with it. If any of my clients are watching this right now, probably not in their heads. I've got a guy who literally almost like clockwork. Every 4 to 5 to 6 weeks, I bump his carbs by 50 grams, and then I add 10 per week, for as long as we go without gaining weight. And then as soon as we gain weight, I drop him back down from there relative to create weight loss. He loses for 4, 5, 6 weeks, and then we repeat that process. So his calories have done this, and his weight loss does this.
Nice.
Right? Instead of what would probably happen is he would go like this, and I would cut more, and he would go like that, and cut more, and he'd go like that. Then all of a sudden he would just go, I can't do this. We're on like 3 calories.
Gotcha.
So you can run yourself into a wall eventually. So you don't want to bottom someone out for all the physiological and psychological adaptations that could happen just by cutting
right.
every time you hit a plateau.
Okay, very good.
My anecdotal thing for me was, and it wasn't actually eating more food, but I can go for 3 to 4 weeks, and I know I'm in a deficit. As accurate as I can, I've been tracking food, and I'll drop weight at first for just normal water, a lot of it's water weight for the first couple of weeks, and then for 3 weeks I'll actually gain a couple of pounds and sit there. And 3 weeks later I'm like, why haven't I lost any more weight? It's like I know I'm in a deficit, and then whoosh, the whole 6 pounds gone in 2 days, and that was just water weight basically.
Yeah, and that is much more common with women. Sometimes the stress from that compounds the stress, like cortisol, water retention the whole time. So like what I'll do often when I've got a female athlete and we know their menstrual cycle is coming, we'll take a week off the scale, just because we know it's not going to be good, and it's only going to compound an already stressed person. Yeah.
Is there a context outside of performance or adherence or lifestyle factors in which taking a cyclical approach to calorie and macronutrient intake could yield better results to body composition?
I think there's an argument for it. There's a few studies. It's we need a lot more here. But yeah, if there's some stuff, I think there's a review by, I might get the quotes. I think there's a review by Verity, Varady, and there's a few studies by a researcher, I can't remember right now, but they're looking at comparing cyclical restriction of both carbohydrates and calories, depending on the study, or either or, versus intermittent. And pretty much the intermittent restriction tends to beat out the cyclical. Now, the funny thing is that what's been studied is very, very different from what we do in practice. I think the primary one that's been studied is actually almost the opposite of refeeds. They do 2 very, very low days and then 5 days at maintenance or close to maintenance.
So it's like 5-2 diet? Judd.
Yeah. So you're dieting on 2 days of the week. So on 2 days of the week, you're like at, 1,000 calories, something really low. It's like basically a protein modified fast on 2 days of the week. And then 5 days of the week, you're on higher. And they're not huge differences. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, investing in sliced bread. But there's a study that looks at better metabolic profiles. There's a study that shows more fat loss. There's a study that shows slightly better adherence. There's a study that shows a little more muscle retention. So
in which treatment, just to be clear, when you say the studies are showing it all better in the intermittent treatment, you're saying?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So the cyclical approach beats out the daily restriction, same intake, all 7 days.
Okay.
So now here's the thing. So people might be saying, oh, if we see that, well, why don't you diet people on 2 and 5 like they do? And here's the thing: is it hasn't been compared against anything except straight. So in my mind, theoretically, I think something like the opposite of that, like 2 up, 5 down, makes more sense. So you don't have these really low days where you can actually accumulate a little more of a deficit. So it's kind of like the refeed approach. So I have definitely seen better results when using refeeds on a once to twice every week to 2 week basis kind of thing.
Okay.
And that is that I would consider that cyclical. Some people would say that's not carb cycling, it's just refeeds, but to me it's all kind of
they're very similar.
Yeah. Now I do think you take that too far and it just becomes kind of silly. Like you have a low day, a high day, a moderate day, a very high day, and a very low day, and then a fast day, and it's like, why? There's no need to have 18 different intakes. Now that said, I have had to have a few clients where I take them so low in calories that I'm being very strategic about where it is based on their training schedule and their life, and it becomes carb cycling more or less. But it's not because I think it provides some physiological advantage. It's just that, look, I'm taking you to the depths and darks of poverty macros, and I want to try to do it in a minimally harmful way to you. So, you know, you've got an on day followed by an off day. Let's make those 2 days 70 grams of carbs. And then on other days, we'll actually be able to eat, that kind of thing. So it looks like, you know, 2 days at 70, 2 days at 150, a refeed at 300. You know, and that to all observations and practical description would be a carb cycling thing. But it's not because I'm trying to game the system. You know, it's more I'm just trying to make it easier for them to follow.
Now, to throw you a curveball. What about in a condition where you're at maintenance or a surplus and you're dieting in a cyclical fashion, attempting to get some benefit to nutrient partitioning by shuttling more nutrients towards the training days and less on the off days or something to that effect? Do you think there's a basis for that? And if you do think there's a basis for that, would you be able to quantify that in any manner? Like, is it very important? Is it minimally important? Is it something most people don't need to worry about, etc.?
I played with my 2011 contest season. I think I did 3 months of UD2 bulking. So those who aren't familiar with UD2 from Ronald McDonald, it's a cyclical diet where you go through purposeful carb depletion workouts and then load. And then it's just a matter of setting the size of the load and the size of the low day's fat intake enough so that you're actually gaining weight rather than losing. And I was putting on a pound every 2 weeks. So like, you know, slow. And I could definitely say I stayed pretty lean. But it also, coming out of a contest season, those high days became my life, you know? Like, I was just focused on, I get to eat 1,000 grams of carbs, you know? And then the low days, I would feel like I'm still dieting. I felt like shit. And I had to, you know, I had three or four different intakes over the week, and I was like, you know, why am I doing this? This is just prolonging some of the disordered eating I kind of naturally have from dieting for 8 months. And I'm not sure I got a huge benefit out of it. I'm not sure if I just gained slowly post-contest anyway and had good training, whether it would have been much different. So the times I will use high days during maintenance or surplus is when I've got someone who typically overeats on certain times of the week, and asking them not to do so is some kind of social stress to them. So like if they always go out with their friends on Saturday night, or if they have date night on Friday with their wife, and they don't want to have to worry about what they eat on the menu, I'll give them a calories and protein day instead of macros, and you know, have more on that day, and we'll be at maintenance or slightly below on the other days. So that's the useful time, is when it makes it more of a lifestyle approach. But I don't think, if there is a benefit from doing some kind of temporal manipulation day to day and training manipulations, kind of like UD2-esque for bulking, the benefits would be minor. And for most people, the work and stress involved would not be worth those benefits.
Okay.
And it'd be a net counterproductive.
Do you think that, sorry to keep going on this question, but since we have a lot of non-competitive people that follow our Eat, Train, Progress group, and these would, I think it's fair to say as a general statement, these are people that probably don't get shredded, but they're people that might get down to, you know, what a fitness enthusiast might do with their body, so males getting down to 10% and stuff like that. Do you think for general population, the potential advantages of taking a cyclical intake in a deficit are probably not great enough that it would warrant doing anything outside of your preferences or outside of what best helps your adherence and your training performance and things like that? Like, would you still put adherence and performance at the top of the list when it comes to making the decision between should I cycle my intake or should I just stick myself at a flat percentage of TDEE and just roll with it, kind of thing? Hope I worded that fairly.
I gotcha. Yeah. Even when I don't have a competitor who's dieting down, who's higher, I tend to give them refeeds. Okay. Because in my mind, it's just the micro version of a diet break.
Yeah.
Right? Now, sometimes that actually stresses people out. Like, they will, you know, they see the refeed coming and they see it as a step backwards, but they're afraid of getting fat eating just on one day. Yes, maybe it prompts a binge. Those are the three things I have seen occasionally in people when I give them refeeds. However, each one of those three things is a red flag indicator for me. And those are coaching points. That's all three of those mindsets and behaviors are borderline disorder eating.
Okay.
So, and what does that mean for someone if they can't have one day of maintenance in a week for when we're finished the diet? That's going to be a problem. When I'm going to ask them to eat that almost every day. So I do feel that having a diet break day, once a week or once every 2 weeks is beneficial. It allows someone to have more of a social life. And sure, all of the physiological advantages are going to be muted because they're higher in body fat and probably not training as hard, and all those things that you were talking about and alluding to that would be present in a physique athlete. However, I think that it almost always helps adherence, and that is up there. Even when I'm working with, a WNBF pro, I'm thinking about adherence because they will still adhere to it, but how much willpower it takes for them to adhere to it is still worth talking about.
That's great.
We have that. I feel we don't know how to quantify it, but there is a quantifiable amount of willpower that each person has. Yes, bodybuilders tend to be at the top 0.001% of the population, but you can deplete them to the point where it hits you in the off season. Like you have a shitty off season, or you gain 30 pounds more than you intended in the off season, or something like that. Or their goal is to do WNBF Worlds in November. They start in January. They do their first show. They do a second show, and they go, you know what? I just don't have it for Worlds. So they still got shredded and competed in 2 shows, did really well, but they didn't do Worlds, which was their goal. Or they have to skip next year's Worlds because they would have to diet for extra long. So it'll still catch up with you. Or their wife gets mad at them all the time, and it damages their personal relationship. Something goes. Like it comes out somewhere. It may not affect the realm the coach sees, but that's why you kind of have to have a more holistic perspective, even when you're working with the willpower studs.
I find on the topic of willpower being a resource, I find that at least in my limited experience as a coach, that doing some environmental management seems to help that a great deal by just putting them in an environment where they're just not having to make as many food-related choices. So, for example, not seeing the bag of cookies sitting on the counter and having to force themselves to decide whether or not to eat the cookie. Just kind of eliminating that from their environment seems to help the whole willpower thing, because now I don't know if I'm making this up, and now it's like they get to save that decision for something else because they didn't have to use that piece of willpower on that particular thing.
No, 100%. There's actual research on that.
Okay.
And there is some arguments against flexible dieting because it asks the person to make more decisions.
Okay. It seems to make sense to me in some aspect. So.
Yeah. So you have to think about that, and you have to counterbalance it with, yes, teaching a man to fish is the long-term goal, but to learn a new skill, a new lifestyle, like knowing how to look at food and see the macronutrient content and track all these things and have all these options, that's the reason why most people don't do it, and most people struggle to stay lean, is because they want a more heuristic approach. They want something that they can think less about because they've got a full life. And that's not a knock on them saying, hey, they have less willpower. The reality is that most people who can track macros and change their whole lifestyles to fit their physique, their life is fitness.
Yeah.
So of course it's going to be easier for the 3 of us to learn how to track macros, because that's actually what we're interested in. That's what we spend our lives doing. In our jobs we're trainers, in our personal life we're athletes. But when you are a business owner and a father, and you're working out to better your health, and that's a distant third, then where is that extra energy? It's in your business, it's in your family. Yeah. So expecting them to be able to be as much of a macronator as we are is maybe not the best idea. So you have to think about, yes, I want flexibility so they can adhere to it and have a lifestyle change, but every time I ask them to make some kind of decision, that is going to be depleting their willpower. So you have to think about ways to package that. So I'm a big fan of systems. If you read some of my articles or listen to my talks, I don't just kind of throw theory out there. A lot of the times I'll say, and here's how you might do that.
Yeah, that's great.
Or at least I try to.
That's great. How would you recommend that someone develop better hunger cues?
That's a tough one. So first I'll speak to my crazy brethren bodybuilders, is that you lose them. You lose them when you do your prep. They go away. And one of the challenges that being a lifestyle bodybuilder is learning to kind of get that back and and re-find it, knowing that you will lose it almost every time 4 or 5 months into prep, and that it will take 2 or 3 months of, after you're done with your prep and getting back to normal eating or going towards normal eating for them to return. And that's one of the other benefits to taking longer off seasons, is you can kind of re-get that feel. Because I love when my guys in the off season don't have to track macros to the same degree that they do during prep, because it allows them to have that more normal lifestyle. They can learn to be normal again.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in regular population groups, yeah, they're going to experience a blunting of these and an increase in hunger when they diet. But a lot of the reason why they need to diet in the first place is they don't necessarily have a great awareness there, right? So, so there's some things you can do. Simply eating your food slower, you know, like chewing is one of those very, very simple things. You'd be surprised how often I see people who struggle with their weight who just inhale food for whatever reason. Maybe that was because, you know, when they got raised in their family, you had to clean your plate or you get in trouble. So everyone just kind of jammed it back. Maybe they were in the military, and actually I struggled with this. After I went through basic training, you have to inhale your food, and you're actually drinking water to get the food down. So you know, during basic training, that can mess you up for a little bit.
I love to masticate.
Anyway.
I bet you do.
I'm sorry.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you can do. I think simply asking yourself the question, and just actually after each meal, going, okay, how do I feel? Am I actually hungry, or am I eating to be full, or am I eating to be satisfied? And giving yourself some time, you know, eating slowly, waiting 30 minutes after a meal to self-evaluate, those types of things. Making sure that you have a glass of water and a small side salad with dressing on the side before you eat. There's a lot of ways to manage hunger. But yeah, like you said, awareness is huge. So a lot of it is intentionally thinking about it.
Okay. Are you familiar with the book Mindless Eating? Have you read that?
I know of it. I have not read it.
One of the points brought up in that, I thought it was great. One of the points that was brought up there was it's similar to obeying your hunger, not exactly the same, but he was big on the idea of asking yourself. Actually, no, it was making the statement, I am not hungry, but I'm choosing to eat this anyway. Anytime you're going to eat something for reasons other than hunger, to develop the awareness of when you're choosing to eat when you're not hungry. So it's a situation where, for example, if there's a donut sitting there and you're full, but you're going to eat the donut anyway, you would just say, I'm not hungry, but I'm going to eat this anyway. And just going through that process builds that awareness of kind of emotional eating or eating for hedonic hunger, whatever the word is, rather than hunger. Yeah.
That's great. I think I probably should read that book. But yeah,
I really liked the book. I thought it was great.
Yeah.
And so tomorrow night when we finish my tradition after a powerlifting competition is to eat my pint of Haagen-Dazs chocolate peanut butter cup ice cream, because I don't normally have it in the house. So that is where I choose to eat it, just because of the situation. Yeah.
Totally.
We got to go shopping, by the way, for
if
it.
I asked myself that after a competition, I wouldn't be able to say that for 3 months. So
nice.
Well, yeah. The thing is with me, I'm not exactly dieting. Like powerlifters don't diet down that much. So
yeah.
We don't have that whole issue, especially me. Yeah, I know you can say that. Mm-hmm.
So I'll think of a good way to ask this question. Lyle makes a general recommendation for males to bulk between 10 and 15%. He goes into something called the P ratio, having to do with partitioning being better in that particular slot. Would you be willing to just talk about that briefly and your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the idea is that the fatter you get, the less ability you're going to have to effectively add muscle mass. So this has to do with the words that people repeat that they don't have any idea what it means, nutrient partitioning. So simply it means that, you know, there is an ideal range for your body fat percentage. You know, if you go too low, you will get, you know, hormonal suppression and run into problems, right? And if you go too high, you get the same thing, like, you know, hormonal problems and even suppression. You will see reductions in testosterone in obese people. So yeah, if you get kind of messed up insulin and messed up internal hormones, it can be an impediment to putting on muscle mass if you actually are fat, you know, like way above your set point. So that's the simple answer. I don't think it would benefit anyone to get into the complex physiology. But
Sure.
Essentially, probably a good idea to give yourself kind of an off-season cap. For powerlifters, that's easy. You can use a certain amount over your weight class. For bodybuilders, that can be a certain amount over your previous stage weight. For general people just looking to get bigger, it can be basically where you don't like what you see in the mirror is, and maybe minus a pound or two,
Okay.
so that you kind of always stay within your comfort range. So you maybe if you're gaining it at what I think is a reasonable rate, a pound or two a month, if after you're done with your beginner phase, you can go 6-7 months being in a lean gaining phase, and then go 3, 4, 5 weeks dropping most of the weight you gained, hopefully leaving the muscle, and then repeating that process over the course of multiple years, and staying outside of, or preventing yourself from getting into the sloppy fat, I'm only going to be adding fat kind of range. And it's not going to be only fat, but it's just going to make things a little harder. And even if you are getting muscle, you're able to see it because you're sloppy.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. That's a great one. So this is a question that you've probably answered 8,000 times, but as with anything, as new information comes out, or viewpoints can change, etc. What is your current stance on BCAAs and the contexts in which you would recommend that someone get BCAAs and add them to their supplementation?
Yeah, so I think, and we don't have long-term data on this yet that I'm aware of, the only times where BCAA actually provides some kind of performance advantage is fasting, being fasted.
Okay.
So, branched-chain amino acids are actually metabolized in the muscle, not the liver, and converted to glucose like most amino acids when they're used for energy. So they're fast muscle fuel, you could say. And then the other reason why they're popular is because they are the primary, like leucine is the main anabolic trigger of all the amino acids. So that's one of the branched-chain amino acids, leucine, isoleucine, and valine. So yeah, there's been a lot of research on BCAAs because, for those two reasons. It's a master switch for anabolism-ish, and they also can be used for energy. So if you are glycogen depleted, they do seem to delay time to fatigue, and I think there's a study on cycling to exhaustion. I can't remember. So not a whole lot of really applicable research, but typically when I recommend it, it's when someone is training first thing in the morning and doesn't have time to get in a meal, or if they get in a meal first thing in the morning, it makes their stomach upset. Now, also I would say I don't see anything wrong with having a scoop of whey protein, which is going to provide an ample amount of BCAA as well. Maybe not as much as in, like, I think some of the studies, because I want to say the studies that are looking at like 10 to 20 grams of BCAA just to delay time of fatigue, but I don't know if they're compared against lower amounts. So I would say either 10 grams of BCAA or a scoop of whey, high quality whey, say 30 minutes to an hour prior to training. If you're going to be training first thing in the morning, you can probably get those benefits and also be taking care of the repair process. And the only other time I think they're necessary, oh no, that's wrong words. The only other time I like to use them is when I am looking at my overall protein intake for the day and I'm like, oh shit, I'm short. And I don't want to have a whole meal. It's like 10 p.m. I'm going to go to bed, so I'll have like 10 grams of BCAA, knowing that it's going to be about as effective as like 40 grams of whey protein, at least for muscle protein synthesis. So sometimes I'll do it just because I've already blown it, and I'm like, below my protein target for the day. And that just makes me feel better. But it's convenient. Handling pills is easier than making a protein shake. So
I'm going to hit this one other question, and this user would like to know what your thoughts are on running a strength program during a cut, even if your goal is hypertrophy. And I think the thought process is you run a low volume kind of a strength training program so that you maintain or gain strength while you're in a deficit, so that once it comes time to bulk, you're stronger, you can build more muscle. So I think that's kind of where the question's going, but let's hear you ramble about that, sir.
Yeah, so for me, I think of a few things that I'm assuming the person is assuming when they ask that question. And the first one is that they think, okay, look, I'm cutting, so therefore I cannot gain muscle. All right, therefore, and they move on. And that's not necessarily the case. So the idea that a hypertrophy program would be wasted because they can't put on muscle while dieting is probably the first premise which I would ask that person to question. Because in all likelihood, if you were to take someone through being, say, 18% body fat, cutting all the way down from 6, and if they had a moderate deficit, slow cut, they were probably going to be gaining small amounts of muscle in the beginning, and then losing small amounts of muscle in the end, and the net would be a slight reduction in muscle mass, right? Because we are never fully in a deficit or fully in a surplus. When you are bulking, between meals, there is some point where you are in a deficit, right? It's been 3 hours you haven't eaten, you're burning your internal stores. For all intents and purposes, your body thinks you're in a deficit. Likewise, if you are in a surplus and you just had a 600 calorie, 700 calorie meal, for the next hour or so, you are in a surplus. You're going off exogenous food, right? So it is the net sum of these blips and dips and anabolism and catabolism that results in our change in body composition over time. So it really pays to stop thinking about deficits and surpluses as an on and off switch. And the reason why the muscle mass becomes harder and harder to put on later is that because the summation of all of those net deficits over time is resulting in now downshifts in hormonal status, lower body fat, higher stress, and you having to do more things to keep dieting, lower calories, more cardio, and all these other things that compete against the ability to put on muscle. So it's kind of this sum over time. So hypertrophy training, so that's the first assumption that I would question. The second assumption that I would question is the person seems to think that there's a distinct difference between strength and hypertrophy training.
Yep, keep talking, sorry.
And all good.
Yeah, it's the other one.
So hypertrophy is really primarily about volume at a heavy enough load, so putting stimulus on tissue. So you will get stronger doing hypertrophy training, you will hypertrophy doing strength training if there's adequate volume. Now, it is easier to gain strength on a diet than it is easier to gain than muscle. And that is because strength has a huge host of neurological factors that go into it, right? So not only is strength a product of cross-sectional area, but it's also the ability to use that muscle effectively and to learn a movement pattern. So there's a huge neurological component is what I'm getting at, right? So yeah, if you're focusing primarily on moving more load, that may provide a bit more of this kind of feeling like I'm still progressing. It might be psychologically helpful during a diet because you're going up. And that maybe something I have a powerlifter do. However, if you can maintain more muscle mass during your cut, it also makes it easier to then put up heavier numbers afterwards.
Yeah.
So the answer to that question would be, it's not that black and white if those are the assumptions you had, first of all, both as far as the difference between hypertrophy and strength training and the fate of your ability to gain muscle during a cut. So probably the best outcome would be to have a mix of both directed strength training and hypertrophy training.
Yeah.
Knowing that hypertrophy training is just having adequate volume to, prompt that stress. So you can do both. You can do a high volume strength training program that'll net you a lot of hypertrophy.
Yeah.
It takes more time to do because of rest periods and slow rep speeds with heavy loads and all that stuff, and may prompt more recovery because it's more volume at a higher relative intensity. But point being is it shouldn't be either or. There's probably an argument for both a powerlifter and a pure physique athlete to be doing some strength training and some hypertrophy training respectively,
Both.
Because they aid each other.
Both on a cut and a bulk, yeah. And that's one thing,
Yes.
yeah. And that's one, as you mentioned, I'm actually, with Berto, I'm actually doing more of a volume-based program early on to gain the muscle to help with the strength going. As you said, it's not a sort of, you do this or you do this. You've got the mix, but it's just shifting the focus.
100%. Yeah. And I largely don't think your diet should dictate your training. You train for your goals, and then your diet is your diet, kind of thing. Now, sometimes because the diet is there, that means your recovery will be hampered. So you may need to have to, reduce volume at times, or have more frequent deloads, or do whatever you need to do to recover to keep your training effective. But it's kind of losing the priority list. Like, the main thing that's going to keep muscle on you and get you to your goals as far as strength or hypertrophy is going to be lifting weights. you know. So think of the diet as just a tool for fat loss that minimally interferes with your training, rather than oh, I'm going on a deficit, therefore I must vastly, modify my training.
Yeah. And one of the things I've seen is if you're going to, because obviously when you're dieting, you get fatigued more. I do anyway. You get fatigued more, both from a sort of fatigue perspective, but as well as from a sort of muscle retention. Do you normally advise people to drop the volume, like drop a set or two, or drop down the weight? And I think I know the answer to this, but I want to ask you it.
It depends. Like most of the time, I will drop off a set or two from the person, and I'll wait until I think I really have to. Like if there's just like this chronic recovery issue, like after leg day I'm just shot, or every time I go in there I'm just like I'm dreading that workout, and I go, you know what, let's go from 5 sets to 4 sets. You're gonna be fine. Yes, it would be better if we could sustain 5 sets of squats on this day through your diet. But the reality is you're simply not able to do that right now. We're going to get a better result, a higher quality of training, less mental stress, if we could just drop it to 4. I mean, in a perfect world, you would not change your nutrition, your training at all in response to nutrition. You would keep increasing your volume. Training would not, regress at all, and you would gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. But the reality is that your volume probably might need to drop, especially if you're trying to get super lean. One thing that I always hope doesn't get misconstrued from what I say is that, when I talk about volume being, the main thing that correlates with hypertrophy, and I talk about, the difference between an advanced or intermediate lifter is that they probably have to increase their volume over time. It doesn't mean that's independent of strength. It doesn't mean that's independent of manipulating frequency to better organize that volume. And it doesn't mean that there aren't periods where that volume goes down. It doesn't mean that every week volume must be higher than last week, or even every month. If you were to look at, say a bodybuilder's volume, it might be like this in the off season, which is maybe a 2-year period of going up 10%, and then during prep it does this, and then starts to dip a little bit, starts to dip, and then comes back up once they're outside of prep, and that's just more of what we have to do rather than what might be ideal. And then it's going to be deloads and low volume blocks to kind of let you recover, or some people would call that a transmutation, or a different kind of blocks depending on who you're talking to. So,
and also there's
no, go ahead.
And it's also the one thing actually you actually mentioned on like Fitness Summit, when you're talking about powerlifters and cutting and bulking and things, and actually one of the things I was discussing with one of his online clients this morning is if your weight's going down, then if you stay the same, you're actually making progress to a degree, because you're actually still maintaining the same that you did last week, but you're doing it lighter.
I just had a guy ask me, just like literally right before our interview started on Facebook, like, hey, my squat's going down. I've been cutting from the 198s down to the 181s. I'm concerned maybe I should stop. And I asked him, is your Wilks score going down? And he goes, I'm not sure, but my squat's going down. I said, is your Wilks score going down? Like let's hone in on here. Because you can lose 10 pounds on each lift and drop a full weight class and actually be stronger for your Wilks. So it's kind of knowing which variable is the one to look at. So for sure.
Thank you.
I'm going to click the stop button here. That wraps up our interview with Eric Helms. Eric, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to help both us and our readers / group members in Eat Train Progress. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
You're welcome. It's an honor to be on. I appreciate it. It's always good.
Where can our readers find out more about you if they wanted to, if they're saying, where can I learn more about Eric Helms, or where can I find more of Eric's material so I can keep learning more? Where would be the best place to do that? Can you still hear me there, Eric?
Well, I'm definitely just. Yes, I can.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so I'm definitely just one of a 4-headed dragon, or hydra, if you will, of 3D Muscle Journey. So definitely, primarily check us out on www.musclejourney.com. And that is kind of an archaic website, but we are updating it. So very soon it will look not like it's 1993. And then we've also got a Facebook page, so that's just Facebook/3D Muscle Journey, and then each one of the 4 coaches have a page you should check out. And then for the nerdy types, I do have a ResearchGate profile, which is basically like Facebook for researchers, and I want to say that's ResearchGate/Eric R. Helms. Pretty easy to find if you Google it. And then for those who like to watch videos, we put out a whole bunch of free content for those whose coaching is in the cards when we're filled up with clients. And that is YouTube/Team3DMJ, TEAM, and then 3DMJ. So that's where you find out more about all the stuff we do.
And we'll put all the links down the bottom.
Yeah, we will. We meaning who's going to do that?
Well, you'll do it.
Well, of course. So I'll figure that part out. Thank you very much, Eric.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.